With that, I am happy to introduce you to today's presenter, Alfred Day. Alfred has enjoyed a 20 plus year career in the field of student affairs and higher education. He currently serves as the Associate Dean of Students and Director of the Center for Support and Intervention. He is also considered a nationally recognized expert in the area of nerd geek topics in higher education student affairs. Alfred has also performed stand-up comedy professionally and has consulted for the Amazon TV show Chronofilm. Without further ado, take it away, Al.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here this afternoon to present with you. As Tara reminded everyone and laughed at a little bit, I'm going to remember that, Tara. I am somewhat of a professional nerd. That's not exactly what this is about, but I'm always happy to talk about that. I'll also give the caveat that, like everything else in the Zoom world, things are not perfect. So as through the course of my presentation, both my dog and my dad happen to be in the room with me, and both are snoring right at this moment. So if you hear a little snoring in the background, that's probably what's going on. What we are here to talk about today is that's not funny, how to use humor appropriately in the workplace. And we're going to spend some time talking about what is and isn't funny, how humor works, how to use it, and how not to use it when it's appropriate, when it's not, and all that sort of thing. Before we get started, I think it's vitally important to set some ground rules. And the reason we set ground rules is because when we're talking about a topic of this sort, it is impossible to have a real discussion about where boundaries lie without risking overtaking those boundaries that we are trying to define. So as a ground rule, I just want to start out with the idea that it's impossible to discuss appropriate humor without discussing inappropriate humor. In these discussions, we ask participants to be thoughtful about what they share, but understand that there will be moments when people discuss inappropriate material that they have found humorous. Be kind to others and thoughtful about what you share, and endeavor to hear the person's learning through these topics. It is 100% okay to opt out of a discussion if you need to take care of yourself. And I do believe be kind to others and thoughtful about what you share is just a good rule of thumb for life, as well as never tell anybody how much money you've got. So this is what we're going to talk about for the next hour 15 minutes. So I want to give you an overview of what the day is going to look like. We're going to talk about how humor works, like literally what happens to you when you find something that's funny. Why we need humor in the workplace. What's the value of it? I've met and worked with people who are like, humor has absolutely no place in the workplace. I disagree. I think there's value in it. And we're going to talk about what those values are. We're going to talk about who the targets of humor are and what the risk you incur when you attempt humor. And keep this in mind, humor and attempting humor are very different things, but they could often be in the eye and the mind and the ear of the beholder or beholder. I'm not sure of the language there. We're going to assess the factors at play in trying to be funny, and what to do when it works, which is probably something that most people can figure out, and what to do when it doesn't work, which I think most people struggle with when you try to be funny and it goes horribly wrong. At least I've heard that people have a difficult time with that experience. I myself have never experienced it. Who the heck am I to tell me about this? Why are you listening to me? What expertise do I have? I will say one of the funny things about this presentation is I originally used a word other than heck in this slide, and I was asked to change it to a more work appropriate word, which is just about the most appropriate thing that could happen in this presentation. So I find that humorous. I have been, in my 51 years of life, an actor, and I'm only listing the things that I generally have done more than once. So I've acted on stage. I've done one or two TV appearances without lines, and I have been paid to act once or twice. I've also directed, which is probably my second favorite thing to do. My first favorite thing to do is write. I have written for stage and television. I also spent a couple of years working as a professional stand-up comic. I know, it's shocking. And by a professional stand-up comic, that means I got paid to stand on a stage and tell jokes, which means I'm probably funnier than your dad at the holidays, but not as funny as somebody you might see on The Tonight Show or on Conan O'Brien. So as we move through this, I am also a student affairs professional and have been a one since Bill Clinton was president. You can do the math yourself. But to give you a sense, so to give you a sense of sort of what my stand-up career was, I'm going to show you a little clip of me doing stand-up. I'm going to stop it at 30 seconds because after that it becomes work inappropriate. So here you go.
Sexy black grandpa. It works for me. I don't know if you've noticed this or not. You may have not have noticed this. I'm a big man. I am a big man, and it's tough for me. It is tough. There's not a lot of women who's say, you know what is sexy to me? What if Carlton from the Fresh Prince gained like 100?
So that was me playing at the Purple Onion in San Francisco back in 2013, I want to say. Was one of the highlights of my life and career, and I very much enjoyed it. But my experience as a stand-up comic taught me quite a bit about humor, taught me quite a bit about how it works, how it doesn't. And because I was a student affairs professional at the same time, it taught me quite a bit about sort of where the line is between what is acceptable in a comedy club and what is acceptable at work. So let's spend some time talking about how does humor itself work? Has anybody thought about this? Raise your hands. I can see you, but I can't hear you. Nobody, very few people have thought about this. As I said before, I'm a giant nerd. So I have not only spent some time thinking about this, I've done research. I'm a very lonely person. But basically, when we talk about how humor works, there is literally, and it's literally a physiological thing that happens. I always consider it a magic trick. Humor and acting is the one way that we have as human beings to reach across and physically impact another human being, cause them to take an action without actually touching them. Physiologically, what happens when you find something funny is your brain connects two unrelated concepts in an unpredictable way, resulting in an instant of euphoria, right? So just for a moment, your brain says this and this shouldn't connect, and yet they are connecting, and that gives you a pleasurable feeling, which results in laughter. The other way humor works is socially. People connect with each other over their shared experience of trauma, embarrassment, their experience of self-acknowledgement, oh, that I do that dumb thing too, or relief. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that concept of relief later. But in essence, it's how we connect with each other. It's how we're vulnerable with each other. Vulnerability is a huge part of humor. And we connect with each other through humor over that shared experience. And there's a spiritual component. Humor allows you to cause a physical response in another human being without physically touching them. That is an incredibly rewarding endorphin rush. If you've ever done it, you always want to go back and do it again. There is, and this is one of the reasons why people get in trouble with humor at work, is because it is a very pleasurable experience to make someone laugh on purpose. It's not as great an experience to make someone laugh on accident, like if you trip and fall and break your nose and everybody's laughing. That's not pleasurable. But if you intended to make someone laugh and they do, it is one of life's great pleasures. And in a very real sense, the theory that I find most applicable around humor is violation theory. And what that means is humor abounds in the presence of some sort of norm violation, right? You have to share some level of culture to be able to connect around humor. And that culture you're sharing is generally the violation, the norms, basically the rules, the unwritten rules that we all exist in, have to be violated in some sense. It could be a moral norm, such as, you shouldn't rob old people, and robbing a retirement home, because it's such an extreme idea, is a violation, a social norm violation. Breaking up with a long-term partner via text message, because one would expect and hope that someone would have more sensitivity, and the violation of the norm is you didn't do what we all agreed to do as a society. Or a physical norm violation, purposely sneezing directly on a child, which I don't care who you are, that's funny. That's humorous. But it's because these are things that are outside, they violate the rules that we have established as human beings. But the added component is it needs to be a benign or safe context within which that violation takes place. It is much easier to laugh at the idea of someone sneezing directly on a child if we know that that's fictional, that didn't actually happen. If someone is telling a story and we think that it actually happened, it's much less likely to result in a humorous response. So there has to be a component that is benign or safe within the context that the social norm is violated. And again, it goes to that point of two things happening in the brain at the same time. The interpretation of the first 2 points at the same moment is where humor comes from. In other words, one must view, read, or otherwise interpret a violation as relatively harmless. So in essence, the norm has been violated, but no one is hurt. Later on, we're going to talk about the targets of humor and how humor works at targets or directs itself at targets. And this is one of the key components I want you to leave with today, is there has to be the benign or safe context, and context is very, very difficult to read and determine, in order for the humor to be allowed to happen inside of an individual. So at this point, we're going to go into breakout groups, and these are the things that I think you're going to get a lot out of. And in your breakout group, we're going to, Tara is going to be lovely and separate us into breakout groups. And I want you to discuss the following 3 questions. What makes you laugh? And this doesn't have to be at work, just what are the sorts of things that you find funny? This is like a fingerprint for individuals and human beings. It can be very different. And what you find funny may not be what everyone else finds funny. And that is not only okay, that is what makes human beings great. Also, we're going to ask that you share an instance where you laughed at something that you wouldn't have thought you would find it funny. If you heard something and you laughed without knowing it, and then on second thought, you're like, wow, I didn't think that was something I would have found funny. And yet I laughed without even realizing it. And how does laughing make you feel? That's emotionally, physically, any way that feel makes sense to you. So I'm going to send you into some breakout groups to have these discussions. I know we've been on Zoom for 1.5 years, so I'm going to trust that folks can quickly move into the discussion section. We're going to ask you to do that for a few minutes, and then we'll welcome you back once you have that conversation. Please make sure everybody has a chance to contribute. So Tara, if you could send us into breakout rooms.
Okay, looks like people are starting to join back.
Great.
Give it just a couple more seconds.
All right, everyone. Well, I'm glad you were back, and I hope that was insightful and helpful to you. So with all the complexity of humor, why not just say, look, let's not try this. We're at work, a work site is inappropriate for trying to be funny. Let's just say, let's not do it. Well, I do think that there is some need for humor in the workplace, and we do get something out of it as human beings. What does humor do for us? Humor, laughter, connects us to each other. When I think of my life and I think of the joyful moments of my life, the vast majority of them have involved laughter, have involved laughing with friends or laughing with family, or times when I was a kid and my brothers and sisters and my mom said something funny, or things of that sort. It is a great connector of human beings. The other thing that humor does for us is it relieves tense situations, particularly over the last 4 14 to 16 months, but just in general, I have personally, owning my own emotional state, needed to laugh. There has been a lot of tension, and there is generally a lot of tension in a work site. And if you can figure out a way to use humor appropriately, this is a great way to relieve some of that tension. One of the things that I find most intriguing about using humor in the workplace is it is a way to make a point or to communicate an idea in an intriguing and compelling manner. It is one thing to just sort of say, hey, here's my idea of what we should do, or here is what I think the problem is. But if you can find a way to express that with humor, it has a much stronger ability to connect and stick with people. Humor is one of the greatest ways of communicating complex ideas in a very simple and understandable way. And one of the final things, and I think the most powerful thing about humor, is it has a way of speaking truth to power. What we know about humor, and this could be apocryphal, that, sort of in the ancient times, the only person who could make fun of the king was the jester, that was the only thing that was allowed. And we live in a world in which we are not only should we be speaking truth to power, but we're absolutely the future, I believe, is incumbent upon us being able to speak truth to those who are powerful and those who impact our lives on a day-to-day basis. And humor is one of the most effective ways to do just that. And humor is universal. One of the things about humor is it is based on and in our connection to others within the same culture. So this is a video from a show, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called I Love Lucy. It's a small show that came out in the 50s. And one of the things about humor particularly is a lot of it can be sort of generational specific. And if you don't sort of understand the context, you kind of don't get the joke. But some humor is so universal that it, in a very real sense, can be understood completely outside of its context, completely outside of its time. That we've all had experiences that can relate. And to illustrate that point, I'm going to play a little clip that one or two of you may be familiar with.
All right, girls. Now, this is your last chance. If one piece of candy gets past you and into the packing room unwrapped, you're fired.
Yes, ma'am.
Let her roll!
Oh, this is easier. Yeah, we can handle this, okay? Listen, Ethel, I think this... I think we're fighting a losing game. Here she comes.
Fine, you're doing splendidly. Speed it up a little!
Now, it's important to note that that clip could very easily be about me trying to keep up with my emails. And there's a universalness to it that 70 years later still works on pretty much anybody who watches it.
Department.
So we're going to go to another breakout group. And this one, we want to shift a little bit, and we want you to discuss a time someone said something at work that made you really laugh. I mean, bend over, just cry laughing. And think about why you laughed and share a little bit about that. And take a further step and ask, did it change your opinion of that person, positively or negatively? Did the way you regarded that person shift? And so we're going to go ahead and throw folks into the next breakout group. We're back. I hope that was another enriching conversation. I know it was. I mean, I designed this thing. So let's talk now about targets. And this is sort of where the rubber meets the road. And I think why a lot of folks may have chosen this session. In essence, sort of what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. And when we talk about targets, what we're really talking about is who is the joke or attempted humor pointed at. In essence, who is the target of the joke? And oftentimes humor has a target. And this is one of the critical pieces to determining whether or not the humor you are trying to employ is appropriate for the workplace. If you leave with no other idea from this, it is this: be aware of who the target of your humor is. There's a concept in comedy called punching down versus punching up. Punching up, when we talked earlier about speaking truth to power, is when you are telling a joke that's at the expense of someone who has more agency than you do, who has more power and authority than you do. Punching down is when you are telling a joke and the target of that joke, or the person who is made out to be ridiculous, is a person who has less agency than you, less power, less authority. You want to, and I would say not only at the workplace, but sort of in general, avoid humor at the expense of someone's race, of someone's gender or their perceived gender, your perception of their gender, someone's color, national origin, religion, age, or disability. And parenthetically, I include your own. It is often a way of, and I have been guilty of this at points in my life, of easing tension between you and someone of another identity by pointing yourself out to ridicule based on one of these identity pieces. However, that often has an impact on someone who shares your identity. So if I make a joke at the expense of my race being a Black man, because I have some sort of internal need to be accepted by someone who's not, that not only impacts me, that impacts other folks who share that identity of mine, and risks giving someone an excuse to use that that identity as a source of humor in the future. Quite frankly, I will just say that I have had people say to me, "Oh, it's okay for me to joke about race because me and my friend that I grew up with joked about it all the time." And I have told every friend of mine who doesn't share particular identities of mine that if I ever hear you say that, you and I are no longer friends. It is really important to avoid humor. And, these coincide with legally protected identities. But in addition to that, it's important to avoid humor that intends to shame someone, intends to paint someone as a target of ridicule, to make someone look ridiculous, to make someone look less intelligent. It's important to avoid humor that ridicules someone's financial means. Particularly, again, you want to avoid punching down someone who has less means than you. It is inappropriate, pretty much universally, to use that as an intent, humorous intent. Someone's deeply held belief. This not only includes religion, but it includes any number of things that people really take seriously. I do not find a lot of accuracy in I don't have a deeply held belief about horoscopes. However, there are people to whom that is a very genuine and deeply held belief, and so it would be inappropriate for me to use that as a point of ridicule. And you really, and this is the piece that comes up at work most often, you want to avoid humor that makes light of important issues. It is one of the things that is really critical. Now, does this mean that you can't joke at all in a room in which important issues are being discussed? No, but you have to mind your target. is the target of your joke the person who is subject to discrimination or oppression based on an important issue? Or is the subject of your joke that, hey, we're having a tough time dealing with this, right? One is not fine at all. The other may be fine. Not always, but may be fine, and is more likely to be fine because the target that you're pointing to ridicule is your own inability to sort of figure out what you're supposed to do. It is not punching down at the individual who is subject to harm. What we do want to avoid in humor is causing harm to other human beings. So we're going into our final breakout group. I know you love breakout groups. I know whenever I'm on Zoom, the breakout group is always an excuse for me to be like, yeah, that's about it. I'm going to call it now, but please stick with us. In our final breakout group, we want you to discuss a time when someone made an attempt at humor that was inappropriate or offensive. How did you respond? If you responded at all, oftentimes this happens and people don't respond. If the joke was targeted at someone, did that individual respond? And if they didn't, how do you think it may have impacted them? So we're going to send you into your final group and hope you have rich discussions. And welcome back. So when we talk about humor, we talked earlier about the violation theory. That the entire point of sort of how humor works is it's in essence violating a social norm, and with that violations comes risks. And so what we risk with inappropriate humor, and here's the thing that's important to remember: inappropriate humor is found in the receiver, not you. It doesn't make it okay to say something that other people find offensive because you didn't intend it to be offensive. They get to decide. So what do we risk when we have an attempt at humor that doesn't go well? Genuine offense. There are times in which people make an attempt at humor and figure it's okay because they, to their understanding, there's no one of the identity that it's targeted at in the room, and then they find out there is someone. Someone may take genuine offense at what you say. You risk taking the spotlight. There is, as I mentioned earlier, making people laugh is a very rewarding endeavor. It drives endorphins. But if you allow your need to get that laugh to overcome what's happening in the room, you're in essence taking the spotlight, and perhaps the spotlight doesn't need to be on you for that moment, and your need to get that laugh is less important than work being done. Again, it's related to prioritizing our own needs and emotion over others. And I speak of this because as someone who very much enjoys making people laugh, it's something I have to be careful about, that your need, and it can be a driving need to get that laugh and to have that emotional response that you get when you've made someone laugh. You can't do that at the expense of others or prioritize that over what other folks need. And you could potentially cause genuine harm, particularly in an education setting. Your attempt at humor may be offensive, and it may cause harm to people. Microaggressions, one of the reasons they're called microaggressions is because it's one on top of the other on top of the other. And I know from the microaggressions I've experienced, sometimes it builds up and you react not only to the thing that the person said, but the last 35 things that someone said. And it can be genuinely harmful. And this is what you risk. Whenever you open your mouth to say something funny, all of this is at play. All of this is at play. I had an office clip, but I'm going to skip over it because I want to make sure we get to questions. Now, how do you assess those factors at play? There is a need inherent in all of us to be on the edge. That's where humor lives. I love being on the edge because the closer to the edge of violation, the richer the result. The laughs are bigger the closer they are to the edge of violation. People laugh really hard at things that violate norms, but the line between the big laugh and offense is extraordinarily thin. And quite honestly, it's more of a Venn diagram, that the big laugh is so much infinitely more likely to be the offense. And so you have to acknowledge that what you're seeking with that need to be on the edge, every time you're pushing that edge, it's making you increasingly more likely to offend. How to be sure you don't offend. That's what everybody came here for, right? Al, tell us how we can joke and have fun at the office and not offend people. Well, I can't. This has all been a scam. I cannot tell you how to joke safely at the office because there is no way to assure you won't offend someone with your attempt at humor. It's impossible. It's impossible because there's 6 billion people in the world. And unless you are their twin and have lived together in a hermetically sealed place, you don't know their entire life experience. And even then, I bet those two people offend each other from time to time. What is funny to one person may not be funny for another. And here's the important piece. People get to decide for themselves what is funny. I was watching an interview with Jerry Seinfeld about performing stand-up comedy. And one of the ways he approaches this is to say, the audience is always correct. If you have told a joke and 99 times before it got a big laugh, and this night it didn't get a laugh, it's your responsibility. It's not the office's responsibility. When you're attempting humor at work, it is not okay to say you shouldn't be offended because other people laughed at that. You shouldn't be offended because it's funny. The number of times I've heard someone say, oh, it's funny, so that should be okay. It's not okay. Your attempt at humor does not mandate someone respond with laughter. And so this is a part of attempting humor. The only way to be sure you don't offend is to not attempt to be funny. And even then, you might offend people. You have to understand that any attempt at humor has with it inherent risk. Now, believe me, I'm a big fan of humor and I think it should be used at work to connect with people. However, understand that with risk, with that attempt comes risk. Now, what happens when it works? There's fireworks. It's the best feeling in the world. There's nothing like getting a big laugh. There's nothing in the world like getting a big laugh. If you have not had the experience of standing on a stage and intending to get people to laugh, and they do, there's no experience in the world like it. If you've not had the experience of making someone laugh so hard that they bend over, there's nothing else like it. It is a rewarding experience when it works, risk and all. But when it fails, it's your responsibility to take ownership of it. You have to understand that you tried humor, it didn't work. And a person gets to be offended by what you say. And you don't really get to qualify it. You don't really get to say, well, it's because of this, or here's a reason why you shouldn't be offended. It's on you. You attempted it, it didn't work. When it fails, it hurts. As high as the high is when you get a laugh, when you bomb, it's low, 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 low. And so you have to, that is probably, I didn't put it on the risk page, but probably one of the biggest risks is offense, of course, making people feel uncomfortable, harming people, of course. But honestly, having a joke that bombs is one of the worst feelings in the world. And, but, you know, sometimes to seek safety, one must go into the heart of danger. I wanted to get through this, so we had time for some questions. We've got about 9 minutes left. And there's a question in the chat that I'd like to tackle first, but folks who have questions, please put them in the chat. We have a few minutes and I would love to get to them. And the question is, how does COVID land with humor topics? They had a daughter and then we're recently joking around to save the whales, they must vaccinate the otters because otters are related to other COVID carriers such as ferrets. And this, of course, came before the otters recently came up COVID positive at the Georgia Bay Aquarium recently. This is a great question. And it goes back to a point we made earlier, who is the target, right? One might think that in this circumstance, well, it's animals. They are not human beings. And it is okay to joke about it. I probably, as an individual, wouldn't take particular offense at this joke. However, let's say that someone had a family member pass as a result of being diagnosed with COVID. I don't think it would be inappropriate for them to take offense. And that's not a requirement. If someone is just worried about it, I think that they could take offense. I do think the qualification that you're talking about animals is probably a mitigating factor, but yeah, it could potentially be offensive. Again, it's close to that edge. The bigger piece, I think is important is an attempt at humor made before the circumstance changed. You don't know the future. And so you could have something that's funny and be completely funny on the considering current context, and the world changes, and all of a sudden the thing that was funny 5 minutes ago is no longer funny because things got serious. And so that's an important point to think about, is you can't predict the future. And so again, I wish I could say, here's how to be absolutely sure you don't offend, but this is one of those circumstances where it wasn't funny when I said it, or it was funny when I said it, but now when we have more information, it's not as funny. So I think that's a really good question. Another question, how do you respond to someone who makes an inappropriate comment in an attempt at humor? I think this is a really good question. And it really depends on your level of desire to address that situation. I'm a big believer in addressing it directly. I'm a big believer in saying to someone, hey, what you just said, I know you were trying to be funny. It wasn't funny to me. And I think it was inappropriate. And this is why. I think that often puts people back, because what happens when somebody tells you that you said something that was inappropriate is you instantly want to defend yourself. And that's part of why we're here today. So the people on this call sort of think a second if someone does say, hey, what you said was inappropriate, and understand that people have a right to be offended at the things that you say. And you don't get to sort of say, no, you shouldn't be offended. The emotion you're having is inappropriate. No. You made an attempt at humor. It failed. And someone was offended, and you have to own that. And I do think responding to someone who makes an inappropriate comment is one of the things that is most effective in keeping them from continuing to make inappropriate comments. And another question, could you please talk more about making yourself the target of the joke regarding self-deprecating humor? I often make jokes about myself in the realm of being harried, rushed, disorganized, etc., and I am rethinking what I'm hoping to accomplish with said jokes. This is a really good question, and I love self-deprecating humor. It's one of my favorite forms of humor. I think it shows a certain amount of humility. And the piece that I try to be careful about, and I would be thoughtful about, is, are you deprecating your behaviors, your sort of individual peccadillos, or are you deprecating things like your race, your sexual orientation, your gender? I think you want to be really thoughtful about using those sorts of salient identities as a source of humor, even if you are the person who is targeting them. I often joke about a lot of things about myself. I find myself ridiculous. I think there's value in not taking yourself too seriously. And I'm around myself 24 hours a day, and I know the dumb things I do. And so I do often joke about my own sort of vulnerabilities and failures. However, if it's about an important or salient identity that I share with someone, I think really long and hard about whether that is a good source of humor. If I joke about my race, and when I did stand-up, I was a lot heavier than I am now. I used to joke about my weight, and I went with a very good friend who really didn't like my joking about that. And I had to really rethink a lot of those attempts at humor. And so I think that's a really good question. And I think you want to be thoughtful about those sorts of things. And what can I do if I've offended someone with my attempt at humor? And this is the last question. I think you got to own that they have a right to be offended. I think obviously you should apologize. Even if you think they shouldn't have been offended, remember, they get to be offended. They get to be hurt. You don't get to tell them that didn't hurt their feelings, that they are not, in essence, being offended is an emotional response. You don't get to tell somebody they're not feeling what they're feeling. And you can apologize and understand that they may not accept your apology. the thing you can do is listen. If they're willing to share why they were offended, and they don't have to, listen to it, take it in, apologize if you can, genuinely, not one of those, I'm sorry if you were offended, as opposed to, I'm sorry I offended you. I take responsibility for it. I think you got to take responsibility, apologize, and listen. I have done it many times, and I think that's probably the only thing that is really appropriate to do. And so I know, Tara, you have a couple things before we close?
Maybe. All right, I'm going to put a few reminders. Thank you, Al, first of all, for your very entertaining and informative presentation. Everyone, please remember to complete the session evaluation form that was just put into chat. Next up is our 15-minute break with an optional Tahitian Polynesian dance activity. You can access that in the main conference room on the program website. After the break, you'll also want to be ready for the afternoon keynote, Ask Janet. I'll see you there, and thank you all very much for attending.